welcome to the Amaze SEN Support workshop. My name is Gaynor and I'm one of the SENDIASS advisors on the advice line. I also work in the benefits team. I've been working at Amaze for the last 3 years, I think it is now. My background is in education, and for the last 30 years I've been a teacher and a SENCO and an acting deputy in various different roles in education. And I'm now working on the other side of things, supporting parents and carers, and I'm thoroughly enjoying it. So I am leading this workshop with my colleague Michelle. Michelle, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, yes, my name is Michelle. I am also a SENDIASS advisor. I have been on the advice line for coming up to 5 years, and I'm also the parent carer of a teenage boy with autism.
Okay. Shall we start with the first slide? Right, so what we're going to cover in today's workshop, we are hoping that by the end of this training, this workshop, you will have a better understanding of the following: what school support is and the graduated approach to support, what you do if you are worried about your child's progress, what school should be doing to support your child, and what happens if the school have supported your child and they are still not making any progress, what you can do next. We thought it would be a good idea to start the workshop with an actual definition of SEN, of special educational needs, so that everyone is clear, and I think it obviously gives parents a good understanding. So if you are going to meetings and seeing the SENCO or people at school, you know yourself what this definition is. So Section 20 of the Children and Families Act 2014 defines a child as having special educational needs, or SEN, if he or she has a learning difficulty or disability which calls for special educational provision to be made for him or her. In fact, most often now it is referred to as SEND, the disability aspect also added onto the end of that. A child is considered to have a learning difficulty if she or he has a significantly greater difficulty in learning than the majority of others of the same age, or has a disability which prevents or hinders them from making use of facilities of a kind generally provided for others of the same age in mainstream schools or mainstream post-16 institutions. This slide is showing the law, what the law states. The Children and Families Act of 2014 states that every school is required to identify and address the special educational needs of the children and young people that they support. You'll see throughout that abbreviation, CYP, children and young people, just so you know. Mainstream schools must use their best endeavours to make sure that a child with SEN gets the support they need. This means doing everything they can to meet the children and young person's SEN. They must ensure that the children and young person with SEN engage in the activities of the school alongside pupils who do not have SEN. Mainstream schools must also designate a teacher to be responsible for coordinating SEN provision, the SEN coordinator or the SENCO, or sometimes, as they're now called, the INCO, the inclusion coordinator. This doesn't apply to 16 to 19 academies. They must also inform parents when they are making special educational provision for a child. And just another thing to add at this point as well is that where you see in the law the word must, that means it really must happen. So that is really key, and why it's been sort of put in bold. Just at this point, it might be interesting to note, got some statistics here, but they are a couple of years old now, but in 2018, 14.6% of all children in maintained schools were recorded as having SEN or SEND. 11.7% are on the SEN register, and 2.9% have an educational healthcare plan, which covers a range of needs from sort of dyslexia to autism and a whole range. So it's quite a small percentage of those children that have an educational healthcare plan. Yes, 14.6% of children have SEND. This is 2018.
So the law also states that your local authority must have regards to the views, wishes and feelings of the child, young person and their parents, the importance of allowing them to participate in decisions relating to themselves or their child, the importance of providing information to enable active participation in decision making, and the need to support the child, young person and their parents to facilitate development and enable the best possible outcomes, educational or otherwise.
I think it might be a good place to pause here, as there are often, working on the advice line, obviously there are often lots of questions that we get from parents who ring up for advice and support. And in terms of SEN support in particular, one of the questions that we get asked is, does my child need to have a diagnosis in order to get support? This is becoming quite a common question, and also a question where parents are ringing up with this question because they have been told by schools that their child can't have any support because they haven't got a diagnosis. And in fact, no, your child does not need to have a diagnosis in order to receive SEN support at school. It's all about the need that the child has. Did you want to add to that, Michelle?
Absolutely. I think, where parents are being told that they have to have a diagnosis, it's really important that they know that that's not the case. If a child is displaying any kind of learning difficulty, and there are 4 areas of need, which we're going to go on to speak about, then they should be eligible for SEN support at school.
And equally, and another question, it's similar to that one about the diagnosis, is what parents are asking, is support only for children who have learning needs? So is it only that my child will get extra support because they're falling behind in their maths or their literacy, or find it difficult with their spelling or that sort of thing? And Michelle is going to go on in a minute and talk about the 4 areas of need, but again, it's not only about learning needs. And as Michelle will explain in a moment, there are a whole range of needs, and of course that they may well then affect their learning, but it doesn't have to be specifically a learning need that is the only thing that SEN support is for. Okay.
So yes, as Gaynor was just saying, SEN support covers more than just learning difficulties. There are in fact 4 areas of need. Broadly, these include communication and interaction, cognition and learning, social, emotional and mental health difficulties, and also sensory and physical difficulties. In more detail, communication and interaction might include things like expressive language, the child's ability to speak, their receptive language, that means their ability to understand. Communication and interaction can also include their imagination and the social aspects of communication, and how they get on with other children at school, how they get on with adults, how they understand instructions that the teacher is giving them. So that's obviously a very key area of need for lots of children. Cognition and learning, well, of course, that can include a whole range of learning difficulties. Some children learn at a slower pace than their peers. They may have moderate to severe learning difficulties. They may have specific learning difficulties such as dyslexia. They may also perceive and understand the world in different ways to their peers. So it's going to be a whole range of things that the school should be looking at when they're considering your child's learning needs. With regard to social, emotional, mental health difficulties, of course, this can display again in all kinds of ways. Some children will be withdrawn, and others may have what's called challenging behaviour because there are underlying reasons for that. So again, if you're worried about your child's mental health, it's really important that you speak to the SENCO about that, because they may need extra support at school. And then when it comes to sensory and physical needs, of course, physical difficulties may be experienced by some children who have physical disabilities. Some children may really struggle with the sensory environment at school, especially if they have autism or ADHD. So they may need extra support or different equipment at school to help them cope with their sensory difficulties. So if you're worried about your child and you think they may need SEN support, in the first instance, we would also always suggest that you ask for a meeting with your SENCO. They will hopefully be aware of the things that you're telling them at school, but of course they may not know about the things that are happening outside of school, so it'd be useful for them to know about that. You can ask them what school staff have noticed about your child, because it's important obviously that you all communicate openly and honestly. You can also ask if they've already put into place any support strategies for your child, and if so, what are they? You can ask them what support is available. The support should always be based on your child's needs more than what the school can offer, but still they may have extra facilities or extra teaching resources at school that your child could access. You can ask them what assessments they could offer your child at school. And if you are worried that the school perhaps needs more information and expertise from outside, you can ask them to make referrals to external professionals.
As we go along, there are certain questions that come to mind that parents ask, and I thought it might be a good place to stop there. Michelle was just talking about, does your child need SEN support? And the first thing was about meeting with the SENCO. We briefly mentioned the SENCO, but again, there are some parents who call, and when we talk to them about getting in touch with the SENCO, having a meeting with the SENCO, some people don't know what the SENCO's role is, or they have never met the SENCO before, they've never had any communication with the SENCO, because perhaps at primary school in particular, you've had experience only needed to speak to the class teacher. And that's fine, because obviously the class teacher knows your child more than anyone. They see them every day at primary school, and they would have a good idea of how they're getting on, how they're progressing in their learning, but also in every other aspect of their need as well. But when it comes to any concerns you have, it really needs to be a conversation with possibly the class teacher too, but definitely with the SENCO, because it's the SENCO's role to oversee all the SEN support of all the children in the school. That is their role. So any initial concerns, sure, to be directed to the class teacher. But if you're going to have a meeting to discuss support for your child and any plan being put in place or anything like that, the SENCO really does need to be involved. So if you're at that point, it's worth finding out who the SENCO is and how you can sort of get in touch with them. So yeah, just thought it was worth sort of mentioning that at that point. Okay, now we're going to go on to how is SEN support structured and implemented. This is the same across Brighton and East Sussex, and if you were to look at the school websites, for example, at the SEN section, the inclusion section, you should see that this is the way that schools are organising their SEN support. So this is the additional support that is required by children who are identified as having special educational needs. It's called the graduated approach: assess, plan, do, review. And this cycle can continue for as long as the child needs SEN support, or until there is strong evidence to show that it is not enough to meet the child's needs, and they may need a higher level of support. So it is in a cycle. So if we start with the assess part on the next slide. So again, taken from the SEN Code of Practice. So this is exactly what should happen at this stage. It describes it really well. In identifying a child as needing SEN support, the class, or in secondary school, a subject teacher, working with the SENCO, should carry out a clear analysis of the pupil's needs. This should draw on the teacher's assessment and experience of the pupil, their previous progress and attainment, as well as information from the school's core approach to pupil progress, attainment and behaviour. It should also draw on other support teachers' assessments where relevant, the individual's development in comparison to their peers, and also national data. The list goes on because as well as that, within the school, we've highlighted these additional points that are really important. It should also take into account the views and experience of parents, the pupils' own views, and if relevant, advice from external support services. Schools should take seriously any concerns raised by a parent. These should be recorded and compared to the setting's own assessment and information on how the pupil is developing. So that's quite a big thing to do. The assessment shouldn't just be one thing and based on one thing, like a class test, for example, or anything like that. It should involve input from all of those things mentioned there, so that there's a very rounded view of how the child is doing. The plan stage. Now, where it is decided to provide a pupil with SEN support, so following all those aspects of the assessment part of it, the assess part, where it's decided, the parents must be formally notified, and that's in bold, they must be. Although parents should have already been involved in forming the assessment of needs as outlined above. So at the assessment stage, it's important that parents are involved. And at the planning stage, it's also important that parents are involved. The teacher and the SENCO should agree in consultation with the parent and the pupil, the adjustments, the interventions, and the support to be put in place, as well as the expected impact on progress, development, or behaviour, along with a clear date for review. All teachers and support staff who work with the pupil should be made aware of their needs, the outcomes sought, the support provided, and any teaching strategies or approaches that are required. And this should also be recorded on the school's information system. The do part of this structure. The class or subject teacher should remain responsible for working with the child on a daily basis. So even if they have an additional adult, the overall responsibility is down to the class teacher or the subject teacher. Where the interventions involve group or one-to-one teaching away from the main class or subject teacher, they should still retain responsibility for the pupil. They should work closely with any teaching assistants or specialist staff involved to plan and assess the impact of support and interventions and how they can be linked to classroom teaching. The SENCO should support the class or subject teacher in the further assessment of the child's particular strengths and weaknesses in problem solving and advising on the effective implementation of support. The review part. The effectiveness of the support and interventions and their impact on the pupil's progress should be reviewed in line with the agreed date. The impact and quality of the support and interventions should be evaluated along with the views of the pupils and their parents. This should feed back into the analysis of the pupil's needs. The class or subject teacher working with the SENCO should revise the support in light of the pupil's progress and development, deciding on any changes to the support and outcomes in consultation with the parent and pupil. That is quite a lot of information to be given. And I think as well, and I'm sure Michelle might agree, that we do hear a lot from a lot of parents that when they are speaking to schools about support for their children, that term assess, plan, do review does get mentioned, but it doesn't get explained very clearly, perhaps, as to what exactly it is and where in that process the school might be. And most importantly, not so much a question that gets asked, but something that I think on the advice line we certainly say to parents is you need to have a copy of that plan that's put together. So if you've had all those assessments, and there was quite a lot of things that were brought into that, and then it is decided that yes, there is support that's going to be put in place, and they draw up a plan, which in fact you should be part of as the parent as well. You do need to have a copy of that plan so that you can see what support, what interventions are being put in place. And sometimes this happens, and then the plan stays in place and doesn't get changed. It's really important that when you have that plan, it is dated and there is a review date on that plan, so you know when all the interventions and support that have been in place for your child are going to be discussed, are going to be looked at in terms of the impact that they're having on your child. Otherwise, there is really no point in having a plan in place, an SEN support plan in place. So if you're having that meeting with the SENCO and you've got a copy of the plan, make sure that you are asking and you write it down in your diary and their diary when the review date is, so that you know exactly when that is, and that it should be once a term really that you are meeting. Did you want to add to that, Michelle?
Yeah, no, I think that was really good, Gaynor, a really good explanation. I think it's, as you said, it is really important that parent carers know that they should be involved in the creation of the plan, because they will have important things they need to ensure are included in the plan. And also, it's really important that the plan, as you said, is very specific about the support that the child will receive. It needs to state really clearly what the support will be, how often, how much, who will provide it. Otherwise, it's very difficult really for a parent to know exactly what support their child will receive. And as you said, it needs to be measurable. So when you come to have your review meeting at the end of that half term or whatever, you need to be able to sit down and really look at everything that's happened. Has it worked? Has it not worked? What progress has the child made? And then you're in a much stronger position to be able to talk to the SENCO and the class teacher about how the plan needs to be updated or amended, or have extra things put in or some things taken out. It really needs to be specific and detailed and measurable.
Yeah, and I think again another thing that we find is that parents may say, oh, they've been having, you know, a particular level of type of support for some time, and that's fine. And if that's something that is working well for that child and it's really specific, like Michelle said, and is needed for that child. But if you're finding that it's something that's been in place for a long time and is having no effect, and in fact, you know, it's not really the right level of support at all, it's the review meeting that is the ideal time to talk about that, because there is no point in having a particular intervention in place for a child if it's serving no purpose, or if it's not quite right, that's not quite what they need. And that's when, you know, bringing in other professionals to perhaps do further assessments might be another option as well. Okay.
So yes, this is a list of the things that you can expect school to do. The school should inform you if your child requires extra support. They should invite you to a meeting to discuss your child and their needs. As we just said, they should prepare their SEN support plan, which identifies the needs of the child or young person, the outcomes sought in that period, the support provided to the child or young person, and the teaching strategies or approaches that will be used. The school should arrange termly meetings to review the progress. However, I would also suggest that if you feel things are in a particularly bumpy stage, you can request more than one meeting per term. The school should spend up to the notional budget of £6,000 to provide support for the child. And they should also support the child with their transition to their next setting. So, for example, if they're moving on from infant school to junior, or from junior school to secondary school. These are the services that schools can call on for extra support. If in Brighton and Hove, schools can contact the Brighton and Hove Inclusion Support Service, the BHISS, or BIS, as you may have heard it called. That includes a range of specialist teams that the school can invite into school to give specialist information and advice particular to your child to help them make progress at school. In East Sussex, the equivalent service is called iSend, which stands for the Inclusion, Special Educational Needs and Disability Services. And again, iSend includes a range of teams, for example, that can help with autism, ADHD, literacy difficulties, etc. And the school can contact them and make a referral and ask them to come in and offer support for your child. You can find out more about these services from the local offers. Not a lot of people know what local offer stands for, but it is basically your local authorities, the list or the umbrella term for all the services that may help children and families of children with special educational needs at school. Also, as you can see, this slide covers tools that schools can use to help them ensure that they're providing SEN support as they should be. In East Sussex, the local authority can direct schools to their additional needs plan template. So as parent carers, you can go in and have a look at that and see whether that your additional needs plan for your child follows that template format. There is also something called the SEN matrix that you may hear schools speak about. And again, you can go in and have a look at that link and see what that's all about. In Brighton and Hove, the local authority publishes on their webpage an SEND guide for professionals. And again, as parent carers, you can go in and have a look at that link and just to see whether you feel that your child's school is following that guidance.
This is just a few examples. It's not it's not an extensive list. I mean, you can go on and on and on, but this is the type of support that you should expect at schools. The type examples of interventions that could be put in place at the SEN support level. It might be something like an access to a teaching assistant, and that doesn't mean having a one-to-one support with a child all of the time, but certainly to have a teaching assistant to help with some aspects of need. Sensory space or sensory circuits for the child, an individual workstation that might be within the classroom or just outside the door, whichever works best. Social skills groups, alternative provision to assemblies, PE and break time, so making that reasonable adjustment if that is becoming all a bit too much. Timeout cards or an adaptation to the timetable. Visual timetables are really common. Small group literacy or numeracy interventions so that they're getting that more intense support rather than in the classroom with all the children, or at least set aside. Advice from external professionals, that is definitely something that all schools can draw upon. Specialist equipment or software, and in the case of particularly year 6 and secondary schools, obviously exam access arrangements. It might be that some children qualify for having extra time or having an adult to be with them to scribe or things like that. That's just a few examples. Obviously, there are far more things. We have some guidance on SEN support that we share with parents that can give some more suggestions to that as well. Next slide.
So this slide is about what you can do if your child is receiving SEN support, but you are concerned that they are still not making progress or not making enough progress. Again, in the first instance, we would always suggest that you ask for a meeting with the SENCO, so you can sit down and discuss with them your worries. Again, it's useful at this point maybe to have a list of the things that your child is struggling with out of school as well as in school. Your child may have been able to tell you what they're struggling with, so they may be able to tell you but not tell their teacher. So it's useful for you to get their feedback about what's going well and what isn't going well. Of course, also, you'll want to review the types and the levels of SEN support that your child is receiving, and that's written into their plan. So it's a really good idea to if you have to have a sort of interim meeting to discuss this, that you look again at the plan and does it need updating? Is it still fit for purpose at this point? And if not, can school work with you to improve the plan? For children who are already on SEN support but not making progress, At this point, if external professionals have not already been referred to, perhaps the school could now do that. Perhaps they could invite those specialist teams in to observe your child and give their own expert advice around the support that your child needs. But if the lack of progress continues and the SEN support that they're receiving is not enough, it may be time to consider making a request for an education, health and care needs assessment. And again, you will want to discuss that with the school.
Now, we're not going to go into a whole load of detail on the EHC assessment process. In fact, there is another video that's going to be coming out from Amaze on this very topic. We run workshops on this, but it just seems to fit quite at the end of this workshop, because as Michelle was just saying, if you are concerned that actually your child isn't making progress, and perhaps despite all the support that's been put in place, they're still not making progress in any of the areas that we talked about, and they need a higher level of support. You know, the school may say, well, actually, you know, we really haven't got the resources for that, or we need some more funding. Then it's at that point that you may want to consider requesting an educational healthcare plan, so a needs assessment for an educational healthcare plan. So if a local authority is requested to carry out a needs assessment for an EHC plan by a parent, a young person, school or college, they must consider whether the child or young person has or may have special educational needs, SEN, and whether they may need special educational provision to be made through an EHC plan. If the answer to both of these questions is yes, then they must carry out an EHC needs assessment. In conjunction with that, we would always say, I think, that it's best if you can work with the school on this and in partnership with them, so you can gather as much evidence as possible to submit with the request. Obviously, if that if that isn't the case, then parents can make that request themselves. And the bar is quite low in terms of whether the local authority decides to carry out that assessment, as it says here. It's whether a young person may have special needs and whether they may need special educational provision to be made through an EHC plan. There are still obviously times when the request gets turned down, and then we're into a whole new situation of mediation and appeals, but we won't go into that at the moment in this workshop. So yeah, that's pretty much everything covered in terms of SEN support. You may have lots more questions, having now listened to what we've said and looked at the slides. And obviously, if you do, please do get back to us. Here's our contact number for the advice line. You can call and leave a message and we will get back to you. Or you can email us on the email address there, sendiass@amazesussex.org.uk. If your issue is time sensitive, please put that in the email so we know that and we can ideally prioritize. But yes, if you've got any more questions, please do get back to us. Michelle, I don't know if you've got anything else to add at the end of that.
Just a reminder really that schools do have a legal obligation and responsibility to support children with additional needs. So if a school says to you that they can't do that, you may need to remind them that it is their responsibility in law and that they do have to fund it from within their own budget up to the threshold at which an EHCP may need to be considered. But if you ever feel that a school is perhaps not telling you that what they can do, or rather perhaps telling you something that doesn't really fit with the law, then I think you can always come to us for advice around that. And also, be honest with them. Hopefully you'll have more knowledge now, having watched our workshop. But if you do want to talk to us in more detail about your case, then please do, of course, get in touch.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.